Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. Here is the conflict in a nutshell. We live in a world where we're often told you have to choose. You can pick the laboratory or you can pick the sanctuary.
Right. Critical thinking or faith, but not both.
Exactly. But today we are just tearing that script up. We are looking at a journey that starts with the hard math of quantum mechanics and the violence of the Big Bang, and it ends not with atheism, but with the specific logical conclusion that God is the most rational explanation for the universe.
It really is the ultimate plot twist for the modern age. I mean, we're so used to the narrative that science just gradually erodes the need for a creator.
Of course.
But today we're diving into the mind of Francis Collins, and it is so crucial to remember who this is. We aren't talking about a philosopher speculating in an armchair.
No, this is a heavy hitter. Collins is a geneticist, a physician, and the man who led the Human Genome Project.
Which is arguably one of the biggest scientific feats in history.
Reading the entire map of our own DNA, it's just incredible.
Precisely. And he didn't start as a believer. He was a self-described, obnoxious atheist. He was steeped in physical chemistry and biology, just convinced that everything could be explained by equations.
God was just wishful thinking, a crutch.
A crutch for people who couldn't handle the finality of death. That's how he saw it.
You know, I think a lot of people can relate to that starting point. If you can't measure it or weigh it or put it in a test tube, then it's just not real. But the twist here is that Collins didn't find God by ignoring the science. He found God by digging deeper into the science. He realized that atheism, the assertion that there is definitely no God, was actually the least rational position he could take.
And that's the core of today's deep dive. Collins argues that when you really look at the structure of reality, from the subatomic level all the way to the edge of the cosmos, it doesn't look like an accident.
It looks like a setup.
It looks like a setup. So we're going to explore the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics, the knife-edge fine-tuning of the universe, and then the strange universal moral law that dictates our behavior.
It's a massive roadmap. I mean, moving from the edges of space right into the center of the human heart. And, you know, before we start crunching numbers on the universe, I want to take a quick second to mention why we do this. We want to take these dense, complex topics and just make them accessible so you can make up your own mind.
Which is so important for these kinds of discussions.
It is. So, if you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button. It helps us keep the lights on and keeps these deep dives coming your way. Okay. Now, let's get into the first clue Collins found. It wasn't in a holy book.
No, it was on a chalkboard. It was mathematics. And this is something Collins highlights by referencing the physicist Eugene Wigner, who famously talked about the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics.
I love that phrase, unreasonable effectiveness. But let's break that down because I think we take math for granted. You know, we use it to calculate a tip or build a bridge and we just assume it works. Why does Collins think that's weird?
Well, think about what math actually is. It's a language we invent in our heads. It's a mental construct, logic, numbers, equations. It exists entirely in the abstract.
But for some reason, this abstract language describes the behavior of physical matter with unbelievable precision.
Yes. So you're saying there's a disconnect. Matter is a rock or an atom. It's physical stuff.
And math is a thought. Why should the rock obey the thought?
That is the question. If the universe were just a chaotic, random accident, you wouldn't expect it to follow these elegant, simple mathematical laws. You wouldn't expect an equation scribbled on a board like Schrodinger's equation to perfectly predict how energy behaves.
It's like finding a book in an alien landscape. If you open it and it has grammar and syntax and a plot,
You assume an author.
you don't assume the ink just fell on the page that way.
That's a great way to put it. Collins saw this mathematical structure as a signpost, a pointer toward a rational mind behind the cosmos. But that was just the warm-up.
Just the warm-up.
The real challenge to his atheism came when he looked at the origin of the universe itself, the Big Bang.
13.7 billion years ago, the moment everything started. Now, for a long time, scientists preferred the idea of a steady-state universe, right?
That's right. The idea that the universe has just always been here. No beginning, no end.
Because if it's always been here, you don't need a creator.
An eternal universe is a safe haven for atheism. It avoids the question of creation. But the Big Bang just blew that theory out of the water. We now know with very high certainty that the universe had a specific starting point.
The singularity.
The singularity, a moment where all the matter and energy in the known universe was compressed into a point of infinite density, smaller than a golf ball.
I still can't wrap my head around that. Everything, every star, every galaxy, the screen I'm looking at right now crushed into something smaller than a golf ball.
It completely defies imagination.
Mm-hmm.
But the math works. And then, in a fraction of a second, it expands outward. That's the universe we live in. But here's the logical trap Collins found himself in.
Okay.
Science operates on the principle of cause and effect. Every event in nature has a natural cause.
But the Big Bang is the first event.
And that's the problem. If nature didn't exist before the Big Bang, then nature couldn't have caused the Big Bang.
You can't have a natural cause for nature itself.
It's like trying to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps before you even have boots. Or feet.
So logic dictates that the cause has to be something other than nature.
Exactly. Collins argues that if the universe had a beginning, the cause must be supernatural, literally meaning outside or above nature.
It wouldn't be bound by time because it created time.
Not bound by space because it created space.
Which starts to sound a lot like the traditional definition of God.
Yeah.
A timeless, spaceless, incredibly powerful force.
It does. And you could say, well, we just don't know yet. Maybe there's a natural law we haven't discovered.
Right.
But that's just pushing the definition of natural. If a law exists outside of space and time to create space and time, isn't that just semantics? Collins realized that believing the universe popped into existence from nothing, for no reason, actually required more blind faith than believing a creator started it.
Okay, so we have a creator who is a brilliant mathematician and incredibly powerful, but that's still a bit cold, right? A deist god.
Yes, the god who winds up the clock and then just walks away.
He doesn't necessarily care if I'm having a bad day.
And that is where the fine-tuning argument comes in. This is the evidence that the universe isn't just built, it's specifically built for us, or at least for complexity and life.
The Goldilocks universe. Everything is just right.
It's so much more precise than just right. We're talking about the fundamental constants of physics. Things like the force of gravity, the strong nuclear force, the speed of light.
The factory settings of reality.
They are the factory settings. And Collins points out, referencing work by Barrow and Tipler, that these settings are balanced on a razor's edge. Let's just look at gravity.
Okay.
It seems normal to us. But if the force of gravity had been just 1 part in 10 billion stronger...
Wait, hold on. 1 part in 10 billion. That's a rounding error.
A tiny, tiny fraction. If it were that much stronger, the Big Bang would have happened, but all the matter would have clumped back together instantly.
A big crunch.
A big crunch before stars or planets or life could ever form.
Okay, so what if it was a little weaker? 1 part in 10 billion weaker.
Then matter would have flown apart so fast that it never would have coalesced into stars or galaxies. Yeah. You just get a cold, dark mist of atoms.
So either way, a little stronger or a little weaker, you get a sterile universe. No life, no us.
And gravity is just one dial. There are about 15 of them. The cosmological constant, the mass difference between protons and neutrons.
Yeah.
You touch any of them, and the whole house of cards just falls down.
The knife edge of improbability.
That's what he calls it. The odds of all these being set perfectly by accident are just astronomical. It's like winning the lottery 1,000,000 times in a row.
So how does a skeptic answer that? Because obviously not every scientist believes in God. How do they explain this incredible luck?
The main counterargument is the multiverse.
Right, the idea that there are infinite universes out there.
The logic goes like this. If there is only one universe, the odds of it being perfect for life are too low to be chance. But if there are a trillion universes, all with different settings,
then statistically, one of them has to be right.
And we just happen to be in the one where the numbers work, because if they didn't, we wouldn't be here to observe it.
It's the firing squad analogy. If 50 sharpshooters all miss you, you don't say, I'm lucky, you say, they missed on purpose.
Unless there are 1 billion firing squads and you're the only survivor. That's the idea. But Collins points out a major flaw with the multiverse theory.
Which is?
It violates the scientific method. Science is based on observation. By definition, these other universes are outside our own. We cannot see them, measure them, or contact them.
So to explain the fine-tuning, you have to invent an infinite number of things you can't observe.
That sounds ironically like a religion, doesn't it? Believing in things you can't see to explain the things you can. Collins uses Occam's razor here.
The simplest explanation is usually correct.
So, which is simpler? 1, infinite, unobservable universes we have no proof of. Or 2, one universe created by an intelligent mind that wanted life to exist. Collins argues that option 2 is actually the more rational conclusion.
So at this point in his journey, Collins is boxed in. The math, the Big Bang, and the fine-tuning all point to a creator. But again, a creator who tunes gravity is impressive, but it doesn't mean he's good.
Or that he isn't indifferent. And this is the most critical pivot in the entire deep dive. This is where Collins moves from the telescope to the microscope of the soul. He starts looking at the moral law.
This is the argument he picked up from C.S. Lewis. The idea that there is a universal standard of right and wrong.
Yes. Collins observed that across all cultures, all of history, humans share a fundamental sense of morality. We might disagree on the details, but the core concepts of fairness, bravery, and kindness are universal.
And crucially, we all agree that selfishness, cowardice, and treachery are bad. But
Yeah.
hold on, the standard evolutionary argument is that morality is just a survival mechanism.
Reciprocal altruism.
Right. I help you kill a mammoth today. You give me a steak tomorrow. It's a transaction.
And that explains a lot. There's also kin selection. I sacrifice for my children because they carry my genes. From a Darwinian standpoint, that makes perfect sense.
So why doesn't Collins buy that? Why isn't that enough to explain morality?
Because of what he calls radical altruism. This is the behavior where humans sacrifice themselves for people they don't know, or even for their enemies. This completely defies evolutionary logic.
It does.
If I die to save a stranger who shares none of my DNA, I have just removed my genes from the gene pool. Evolution should be screaming at me, don't do it, run away, survive.
Well, we don't run away. Well, some do, but we consider the ones who stay to be heroes.
Exactly. And the source material highlights the incredible story of Wesley Autry to prove this point. Do you remember this incident from the New York subway?
I do. It's hard to forget. It was back in 2007. Wesley Autry, a construction worker, standing on the platform with his two little daughters.
Right. And a young man nearby, a complete stranger, suddenly goes into a seizure. He stumbles and falls off the platform right onto the tracks, and the lights of the train are coming out of the tunnel.
It's a nightmare scenario. Now, evolutionary psychology says Wesley should protect his daughters, stay back. The stranger means nothing to his genetic survival.
But Wesley doesn't calculate. He jumps. He realizes he can't pull the student up in time. So he pushes him down into the drainage trough between the rails.
About a foot deep.
And he throws his own body on top of him.
The train comes in, brakes screeching, and passes over them. There was barely an inch of clearance. Grease from the bottom of the train was on Wesley's hat.
They both survived. But think about the act. Wesley Autry, an African-American blue-collar worker, risked his life for a white student he had never met. There was no reciprocal altruism here, no kin selection.
And yet, when we hear that story, we don't think, what a genetic fool. We tear up, we feel awe.
That awe is the moral law. It's an internal voice that says radical altruism is the highest good, even though biology says it's a mistake. Collins argues this voice can't be explained by molecules and natural selection.
It implies that the creator of the universe is not just a mathematician, but a moral being. A being who values love, sacrifice, and holiness.
Which brings us to the crisis.
The crisis. Because if God is real, and he is the standard of good, and I have this moral law inside me, I realize I don't keep it.
This was the moment of terror for Collins. It's one thing to believe in a distant force. It's another to believe in a moral judge. He looked at his own life, his pride, his selfishness, and realized he was in violation of the moral law.
It's the irony of the whole journey. The moral law proves God exists, but it also proves that we are alienated from him. We know what's right, but we can't consistently do it.
Exactly. He felt a profound gap. On one side, the holiness of God. On the other, the imperfection of humanity. This is where he moved from theism, just belief in God, to Christianity. He needed a solution to the problem of his own guilt.
And he found that solution in the concept of the wounded healer.
Yes. He looked at the major religions of the world, and he saw a unique claim in the person of Jesus. Unlike other teachers who pointed the way to God, Jesus claimed to be God coming to us.
Specifically, coming to deal with that gap.
And Collins connects this to the Old Testament prophecies. He cites Isaiah, written 700 years before Christ. By his stripes, we are healed.
It's a profound image. The creator doesn't just sit in the sky and judge the rule breakers.
He enters a system. He takes the penalty of the broken moral law onto himself, the stripes, the wounds, and offers reconciliation.
It completely flips the script. God isn't the villain enforcing impossible rules. He becomes the hero who rescues us from our inability to keep the rules.
And for Collins, this satisfied both his intellect and his spirit. Intellectually, it explained the problem of evil and justice. Spiritually, it offered a relationship rather than a checklist.
So let's zoom out. We started with a singularity smaller than a golf ball. We moved through the tuning of gravity. We looked at the strange altruism of a man on a subway track. and we ended up with a cross.
It is a cohesive narrative. Collins' argument is that these aren't separate buckets of truth. The physics and the faith are telling the same story.
He wraps it all up with that quote from Immanuel Kant, which I think is just beautiful.
Two things fill me with constantly increasing admiration and awe: the starry heavens without and the moral law within.
The starry heavens without, that's the science, the external evidence. The moral law within, that's the conscience, the internal evidence.
And Collins' conclusion is that if you follow the evidence of both, they lead you to the same place. The God who tuned the universe is the same God who calls you to be good, and the same God who offers a hand when you fail.
It's a powerful perspective. Whether you are a skeptic, a believer, or somewhere in the messy middle, it really challenges the idea that you have to check your brain at the door to find God.
Indeed. It suggests that the deeper you think, the more likely you are to find him.
That's all for this deep dive, but I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over. If the universe requires a mathematician to build it, and the human heart requires a judge to define it, is it possible that the wounded healer Collins talks about is the only figure in history who unifies the physics of existence with the ethics of living?
That is the question worth asking.
Thanks for listening to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. We'll see you on the next one.
Goodbye.